5 minutes.
Acting Secretary, a New York Times story, April 17, 2023, headline says, as migrant children were put to work, the U.S. ignored warnings. The White House and federal agencies were reportedly alerted to signs of children at risk. The warnings were ignored or missed. It goes on and says thousands of children have ended up in punishing jobs across the country, working overnight in slaughterhouses, replacing roofs, operating machineries in factories, all in violation of child labor laws, a recent New York Times investigation showed. I think you know by now, reportedly hundreds of thousands of illegal children have entered our workforce in dangerous jobs. And this story says that you and this administration have completely ignored what I believe is another example of the biggest humanitarian crisis in American history. What the heck are you doing about it?
Thank you, Congressman, for that. So you're right that we're talking about children doing jobs that are highly dangerous, that it's illegal for children to be working. We're not talking about a young person trying to get their first experience working at the local convenience store, right? Learning how to show up on time and manage a budget.
Secretary, this story says you ignored this issue. I know you just said I'm right, but why is your department ignoring hundreds of thousands of children illegally in the workplace working in unsafe conditions? What are you doing about it?
Thank you, Congressman, for that. You're right. Let me be pointed about this. So I don't believe the story said that the Department of Labor was not doing what we need to do. In fact, I believe the stories came out because the Department of Labor was doing our job. We investigated a case that involved over 100 young people, as young as 13, working exactly in the conditions that you've talked about.
Ma'am, the policies of this administration, opening the border wide open, has resulted in hundreds of thousands of migrant children entering the workforce in America in unsafe conditions. In fact, one lawyer, Linda Brandmiller, said that there were so many opportunities for the Biden administration to connect these dots that no one ever did. I mean, the question is, why didn't you do anything about it? I mean, you come before this committee today and tell me that you agree with me, but what are you doing about it? What is the all-hands-on-deck moment in your department to take care of this issue?
I agree that the work, that children doing that work is horrific. This is also related to our budget request, which is to make sure that the Department of Labor has the resources to investigate all the cases. But the reason that those cases are in the news...
The Trump administration was night and day different on this than your administration. In fact, since the Biden administration started, we've seen a 69% increase in child labor violations because of the open border policies that have flooded this country, in this case with reportedly over 250,000 kids coming into our country, entering unsafe conditions. And I'm glad you're here to tell us that you agree with me, but I don't think the New York Times even says that you're ignoring it. In fact, let me go on, because this is, it's really incredible. Secretary Mayorkas in April was asked before the Homeland Security Committee in the Senate about this catastrophe. And you know what he said? He shifted the blame. He said, it's your fault. He said, this problem is your fault, the Department of Labor's fault. Is he right about that?
Sir, I agree that children should not be doing these kinds of jobs, and I agree that we should do everything we can within it is our responsibility as the Department of Labor to crack down on child labor by doing investigations and making sure that employers who profit from this kind of labor are held accountable. That is what we did in the case. The PSSI case is probably the one that's in that news article, because that is the case that helped to bring this issue to light. And I think it's a positive thing that we are talking about this issue to try to crack down.
I'd like to enter this New York Times story for the record.
The other thing, Congressman, just so you know...
Madam Chair, I'd like to enter the New York Times story for the record. My last question for you, Acting Secretary. How closely do you work with ICE on issues like this?
So there's an interagency task force now that's been created that the Department of Labor leads because of our leadership in investigating these cases. It does include the Department of Homeland Security. It includes our partners at the Health and Human Services.
Is there a role here for ICE working with the Department of Labor to enforce child labor laws?
I'm sorry, Congressman.
Is there a role between your department and ICE to
So this task force is meant to make sure that we have an all-hands-on-deck approach so that children are not working in such horrific conditions.
My time has expired, but Madam Chair, I'd like to also enter for the record a memo that the acting secretary drafted July 7th, 2017, instructing in her previous role in the state of California.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sue. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Sue, I take my duty to conduct oversight very seriously. Unfortunately, Secretary Walsh did not take his obligation to respond to oversight seriously. During your short tenure, your track record appears to be about the same as his, at least until you attempted to cancel your appearance at the last minute and are here today only because my threat to issue a subpoena caused you to reconsider appearing. In most cases, you've responded to the committee's inquiries with a vague letter providing none of the requested documents, therefore, thereby technically responding to the inquiry, but not, in fact, coming close. Will you commit to providing fully responsive answers to the committee's request? Yes or no?
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Fox. I am very happy to be here today to testify. I understand that our teams worked together to
Ms. Sue,
find the date.
Yeah, I just need a yes or no answer, and I appreciate your being here. And you don't have to say thank you very much for the question. That just takes up time.
I appreciate that. Chairwoman Fox, I want to say that I take the oversight role of this committee and of Congress very seriously.
Then you'll be saying yes to my question. Yes, you will answer our request completely. Is that right?
Chairwoman Fox, my team understands that it is our job and it is my request that we respond to oversight requests and work with your team to make sure that you get what you need.
Do you understand that failure to provide complete responses can result in the committee taking compulsory measures?
Yes.
Good. You know that word. Ms. Sue, in March, my staff requested performance information on DOL's workforce development grant programs. The department's had over 2 months, yet the information that has been provided to date is incomplete and lacks employment and earnings outcomes for a significant number of grantees. How can your department effectively manage discretionary grant programs if you're not tracking grantee performances?
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox. It is very important, as you say, to track outcomes, to make sure that we are good stewards of federal monies.
Okay, then my request should be very simple. Just hit click and send what you've got. Can you commit to providing performance information on all of ETA's discretionary grants by the end of the week?
Chairwoman Fox, it is my understanding that we have been responsive to requests from you and from this committee. If that is not the case,
well,
yes,
let
I
me
commit.
just tell you directly, your department has not been responsive. So please review our request and respond appropriately. Going forward, will you commit to posting the employment and earnings outcomes for grant programs on the department's website?
Chairwoman Fox, I'm not clear specifically on the details of what you request, but we have worked to be transparent about our grants and also about outcomes, and I agree with you that it's very important to make sure that what we're funding works.
If the letters are not clear, and I read those letters very, very carefully, as do our staff members, to make sure they're clear. But if you would simply send a response back and tell us what's not clear, we'll certainly clarify it. But we do think the letters are very clear and that the information we need is very specific. So let me switch to the wage and hour division briefly. Despite the wage and hours division nearly 10% increase in funding over the last 4 years, it collected the least amount of back wages for workers since FY 2010, down by nearly 33% from 4 years ago. The number of workers receiving back wages is the lowest on record for WHD. As I said, down by more than 51% from 4 years ago. These results are not due to a resource issue, and COVID is no longer a legitimate excuse. These failures reflect the management problem. What are you doing as a manager to fix this poor performance?
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Fox. As the Deputy Secretary of Labor, over the last 2 years, I had responsibility for management of the department and worked closely with the Wage and Hour Division to make sure that we were
we already know
performing
that.
our mission.
We already know that. So what's the solution?
So one of the things that when we came in January of 2021, the department, their enforcement resources had been cut dramatically in the prior administration, about 14%. And we have, in the time that we have been here, worked to rebuild the division, to train staff, and to make sure that we are investigating not all workplaces, right? It makes sense to be targeted and to be smart and to identify